Nothing else to do. If you're a psychologist, one of the things that they're going to ask you to do potentially is to evaluate somebody as to whether they should be committed or not. There's 4 different types of civil commitment. The first is emergency detention. This is the most common way that individuals are initially admitted to the hospital. They're acting erratically. We're not exactly sure what's going on. So we admit them. We don't commit them at this point. We just admit them to protect them from themselves and protect other people from them. So it's known as emergency detention. And you can usually hold somebody for about 48 hours, depending on the state. Every state's got their own laws. But you can hold them for about 48 hours. My niece, one time she came into the emergency room. She was acting erratically. She seemed paranoid. They discovered that she and her boyfriend had torn her mother. His mother had a brand new Buick, and they were sure that that drug dealers had planted a bug in their car and were following them. So they took the car down to the river and they tore the thing completely apart. Completely apart, everything. They ripped the seats out and pulled all the foam out of the seats. They tore the whole thing apart. They tore it apart so badly that they couldn't put it back together. They had to total it because they had pulled things out. They had pulled things, things that were welded, they had pulled the welds apart. That's how paranoid these people were. And then they took her to the hospital, and of course, she was acting erratically, she was acting paranoid, obviously. She was on meth, and she was also on heroin. Nobody knew she was on heroin at the time, but they admitted her to the hospital. But they could only hold her for 48 hours, and then her grandmother came and got her out. The other thing you can do is voluntary inpatient commitment. If you agree, then you can go to the hospital and you can commit yourself. Usually it's the same amount of time, about 48 hours, depending on the state. Some states will allow you to be there for 72 hours, but the voluntary inpatient, you're thinking you're committing suicide, or you can't get this thought out of your mind. So you take yourself and admit yourself to the hospital. And usually they'll hold you for about 72 hours. The third is involuntary inpatient commitment. It requires a court order. And the fourth is outpatient commitment. And all these require psychologists. The terms dangerous and dangerousness merge 3 distinct constructs. The first is risk factors, variables associated with the probability that violence or aggression will occur. Some individuals who are feeling violent and they think they want to attack somebody, sometimes they will commit themselves. Harm, the nature and severity of predicted and actual aggression, how much harm will be done. This is something that has to do with, usually has to do with weapons. It also has to do with paranoia. How paranoid is the individual? What's the probability that they're going to strike out and harm somebody? If Francis punched me in the face, maybe it would make him feel better. But at the same time, it would potentially do me harm because he'd break my nose, he might break my cheek, might do me harm. If he pushed me up against the wall and I hit my head against the wall, once again, that's harm. We have to determine how much harm potentially can be done. This is one of the reasons why in domestic violence cases, often if the female is the aggressor, a lot of times they determine that not very much harm can potentially be done. This is what happened with my first wife. She liked to use instruments to hit me and to beat on me, baseball bats and pots and scalding water. So potentially she could have done a lot of harm. She only weighed 85 pounds. Potentially if the cops had ever come over to, if I had called the police which I never did. But if I had, they would look at her 85 pounds and my 135 pounds, and they would have figured out, oh, she can't hurt him. No, even if she hit him with a baseball bat, she's not going to hurt him. Even if she stabbed him in the chest with a knife, it's not going to hurt him. And of course, she did all those things to me. Risk level, the probability that harm will occur, and of course, that's what they try to determine. Now, you may ask yourself, why in the world, this guy was, the police picked this guy up once, he had been threatening somebody with a pistol, and then all of a sudden he goes into a bar and shoots 12 people, kills 12 people and wounds 17. Why didn't they just arrest him? Why didn't they take his guns away from him? You may ask yourself that question. The problem is this. There are laws that say that we cannot deny somebody a weapon. The Republicans tried to get the mentally ill to be able to have a weapon. They tried to do away with the laws that said that the mentally ill shouldn't be armed. We already anybody that has committed a felony, they have to stay away from weapons. If they are found with a gun, then they can take away their probation or their parole or whatever and put them back in jail. So the question is risk level. If this guy has shot somebody before or shot at somebody before, potentially they will arrest that select individual and take their weapons away from them. But the reality is that the Fourth Amendment rights of the United States, some people interpret that as absolute. And that's one of the reasons why these guys are wandering around with military-style weapons with hundreds of rounds of ammunition, and nobody does anything about it. I think I told you the story about I was driving home from Ashford University, and I pulled out and was driving up the hill, and I saw the guy with a rifle under his coat. It was raining. It wasn't raining that hard, but it was raining, and I could see the butt of his rifle sticking up out of his coat, and I could see the barrel pointing down. It looked like an AR-15 to me, just from the little piece of the barrel that I saw and the butt of the rifle. It looked like an AR-15 to me. And he was headed toward the college with an AR-15, potentially. So I had to decide what to do. It's perfectly legal to carry an AR-15 any place in Iowa. You can carry one, and he could probably have discharged that weapon as long as he didn't discharge the weapon in a residential area. He couldn't have shot the gun in Clinton, Iowa. But the problem was, he was headed for the college. He was a young 18, 19-year-old, and he looked pissed. He looked angry. And I had to decide what to do. What would you have done? You see somebody with an AR-15 headed toward a college, somebody headed down the street this way. If you see somebody walking on that road coming this way with an AR-15, what are you going to do?
Run. Kidding.
Well,
Someone?
What would you do? What would you do?
Run.
Call the police?
Get on the horn. Just let CJ know.
Is that what I should have done? I should have called the police?
I would, yeah.
Yeah, he's about 2 minutes away from the school, walking downhill in the rain with a grouchy face and an AR-15 under his coat. Is that what I should have done? Yeah. I should have called the police. I didn't have a cell phone. I know. Didn't have a cell phone.
Offer him a ride and take him somewhere.
Jeez.
We were headed in opposite directions. I was headed up the hill and he was headed down the hill.
Or just waved at him. Maybe it would have made his day a lot better. He'll probably change his mind.
Just a little things.
Should I have ignored it?
No.
What would you have done? I mean, we see this stuff from time to time. And hopefully you never have this experience.
I don't.
Yeah, well, hopefully, well, it could happen tomorrow afternoon. What do you do?
If
If
you,
you
Try to
call
stop
the,
them.
if it's on this road and you call the Navajo police, I think the
Take like an
closest.
hour, 30 minutes.
Oh, no kidding, they're in Shinli, if anywhere, or maybe Pinyan.
these other shootings that happened in the past, like the Columbine and the theater, nobody saw them take guns to these places. Maybe they did.
Or they
never
ignored
called
it.
us. Yeah, they ignored it. They never called in, or they thought it was probably nothing. So
Exactly. So that's the question. That's the question. What do you do? Ignore it? Pretend it didn't happen?
or like the one in Las Vegas, I think the
He'd been
service
taking
people-
weapons and ammunition upstairs for days,
Yeah, nobody even said.
and nobody cared. Now somebody's dead. Well, a lot of people are dead. What would you do? These are my students who you have to remember, these are my students, these are my babies.
I wouldn't know what to
But you'd have to make a decision. I had to make a decision.
do. It's
In the moment, when you're in the moment, you probably know what to do, but if you
No.
think about it, then I don't
No.
think you would.
You gotta know what to do right now, right this instant. You can't, I mean, otherwise, he may go down there and start popping away at the school. You could have done that.
I'll probably walk the other way and call the security.
Called security. See, you and your damn telephone. I didn't have a phone. I couldn't call anybody. And besides, how long is it gonna take by the time the cop, even if it takes 2 minutes, how many rounds can you shoot in 2 minutes? You could have emptied several clips in that time. What are you doing, Sharon? I don't care if you're writing things, but what would you do in that situation? Think? Think? That's what I did, I thought. But I had to act. I had to act. Otherwise, people are gonna die. Maybe, or maybe not.
Yeah.
I had to do something, didn't I? What would you have done in your little Miata? I was driving my Miata. It's like this tall. Oh, the world is a tough, tough place. What am I gonna do? You can have all the AR-15s you want, as long as you don't take them close to the school. What would you have done, Tyrone? You got, I didn't have a telephone. I didn't have a telephone. He could have stood on the other side of the street and shot at the school. There was a dormitory sitting right here. And it goes lengthwise. So he could have shot into all those windows. He could have shot all those windows and hoping to hit somebody. And potentially kill dozens of students. What would you do then? Who's driving? That was my idea. What would you have done? Just ignore it.
Yeah.
Go home, pretend nothing was going to happen. What do you do?
Stand there.
Just go away. What am I going to do, Sherry? What should I have done? Okay, well, that's a good solution. What am I going to do? Right to security. Well, that's exactly what I turned around. I went up and I'm going, oh my God, he's almost there. And so I zipped up the hill and I turned around and I came back and I was going to take him out. I had decided I was going to run into him with my car. Of course, he would have done more damage to my car than I would have done to him. It's like,
So did they gang?
I'm sorry?
Did they gang? Wait, is this true?
This is a true story. This is a true story. I had to decide what to do. So I turned around and I went back and I was ready to confront the guy. And hopefully, if he started shooting, then he would have shot me and that would have warned everybody else to take cover. That was my thought. The other thing was, if he had his rifle out, I was going to run into him. I was going to take him out. That was what I decided to do. But as I pulled down the street, he was almost parallel with the dormitory. The dormitory was sitting right here, and he was right here. But somebody had stopped to pick him up. It was a female, and he was all yelling and screaming, and she was screaming at him. So I don't know what was going on. Maybe he just bought the rifle up the hill, and or from somebody.
So nothing happened?
Nothing happened. Nothing happened. I mean, I could have done something to that guy because he was carrying a rifle near a school, which is school zone, but he had every right in the world to have that rifle. And he had every right in the world to have it loaded. And he had every right in the world to have it out on display. He can do that. This is not illegal. He broke no laws with the gun until he got close to the school. And then if he had discharged that weapon, for one thing, he would have discharged it in town, and the other thing was he was too close to the school to discharge the weapon. So I was afraid he was going to shoot somebody. I didn't know who he was. He looked like he was a high school kid, but I had no idea. I mean, you can't tell how old somebody is. I mean, half of you guys look like you're in the sophomores in high school or something. Congratulations.
Ego boost for the day.
Everybody looks young to us old farts. Clinicians who perform risk assessments try to predict which persons are and are not likely to behave violently in certain circumstances. And that's the problem. As long as everything's okay, then they're going to be okay. You don't want to just incarcerate somebody for no reason at all. I didn't want to run over that kid. I couldn't have run over him in my car, but I didn't want to hit that kid. Because if I was wrong, then I would have gone to jail. But he had a weapon. He had a rifle. And it was a military-style rifle. I could see the end of it. I could see the suppressor on the end of it. I could see the butt of the rifle. I knew it was a military-style rifle. And I was ready to do something, anything, to keep that kid from shooting my students or any of the students at Ashford. They need to give some estimate of risk for violence, and of course you never know. We're trying to predict what's going to happen in the future. Who would have predicted that Marine would have loaded up his pockets with M9 clips and gone into a bar and started shooting people? He killed 12 and wounded 17. Why in the world did he do that? This is in Thousand Oaks. This is right outside of Thousand Oaks. This is in Ventura. The military, there's a Marine base right there. And he had been out of the Marines for 5 years. Loaded his pockets with clips, went into the bar and started shooting people. And I think they were in a conga line when he opened fire. So you have to make these decisions. What's going to happen next? You can either assume that the worst is going to happen, or you can assume that nothing's going to happen and drive away and pretend that everything's going to be fine. Everything isn't always fine. Offer suggestions on how to reduce the risks, and of course that is the other thing that risk assessment does. The base rate of violence in some groups is low, so clinicians are being asked to predict a phenomenon that rarely occurs. Millions of men came back from Vietnam with PTSD. Now, PTSD sometimes causes people to react in a violent manner, but it only happens in about 5% of the situations. So do we arrest all? Do we try to incarcerate all 100% of people with PTSD? Or do we let those 5% do something violent? That's the question. And the answer is, well,
You kind of have to let it
Well, you gotta let it play itself out. So as soon as the guy is violent, then you throw him in jail, and you know exactly why they did it. But, can you stop it before it occurs? A lot of abused spouses after Vietnam. A lot of the abuse didn't have to do with the spouse themselves. A lot of times the guy woke up from a bad dream and was still in his bad dream. He was having night terrors. And he would strike out at his significant other. Clinical assessments of persons are often conducted in hospitals or prisons, whereas one needs to know risk of violence in the community. One of the problems or one of the things that we've seen recently, they just released O.J. Simpson from jail. Now, O.J. Simpson potentially, and you can believe one way or the other, he was acquitted of murdering his wife and Ronald Goldman, but potentially he came up behind these two people, grabbed them by the head, and slit their throats. He almost decapitated the male. He almost decapitated Ronald Goldman. Or somebody did. So if he's that violent, he's a football player. He's an ex-football player. So he's big and he's strong. And potentially he murdered two people and got away with it. And then he tried to rob somebody in Las Vegas. And that's what he was thrown in jail for. So would you have paroled O.J. Simpson? Potentially he killed two people in a violent way. With a very large knife. He slit their throat. And of course, none of you have ever slit anybody's throat, but it's not the easiest thing in the world to do. But if you're angry enough, then you go really, really deep, especially if your knife is really, really sharp. We won't go into the rest of it. That's the way
Just got visuals.
You got visuals? Okay.
We'll stop there.
So you grab somebody by the head and you slit their throat, and you want to kill them. I mean, you're trying to kill them, but how deep do you go? Well, this is not that
No.
pretty soft tissue. All you need to do is,
You need a bigger knife to get through the road.
So would you have released him from prison? Potentially he was violent.
Simpson, no, but because he's O.J. Simpson, sure, why not?
Oh, let him go.
He has money.
He keeps
Not anymore. All of his money goes to the Goldman family. I know. The Goldman family sued him. They won. So all the money that he had to give to the Goldman family. And it's still happening because he wasn't able to give them as much money as, I know it's like $17 million or something. So any money that he gets, he has to pay to the Goldman family. So the question is, would you release him from prison? This man has done something violent.
Logic says no, but I don't know. I don't think so. And it all depends on what other criminals are coming in as well and who needs to be in jail more than him.
Remember I told you about my cousin was killed he's a cop and he was killed in a domestic violence situation. The guy that killed him is coming up for parole. Even though he's a cop killer. He shot my cousin with a 12-gauge shotgun. With slugs. I mean, they had slugs. It's not bird shot. It's not like he shot him with bird shot. Shot him with slugs. Punched a hole completely through his chest. So would you release this guy? He was drunk. He was on speed. He was on crystal meth.
Then probably, yes.
And he was beating the holy hell out of his wife.
Well, of course they're going to let him
Are they going to, would you let him go? Would you parole him? He killed a cop. Would you let him go? Now, the fact that he was my cousin doesn't mean anything. That's not important. But he's up for parole. And he'll probably be paroled without anybody even thinking about it.
go.
Because, well, they've got excuses.
The notion of rehabilitation
Alcohol, you mix
Yeah.
alcohol and meth together, really bad combination, makes you really violent. And he was beating up his wife. His wife has divorced him by this time. So he's got nobody out there to beat up, well, potentially, until he finds somebody else. Okay.
So, yeah, he's gonna get caught.
So they'll probably release him. But as a psychologist, potentially, your job is to go and talk to this guy and try to determine if he is still capable. There is a risk factor as to how much violence he is going to perpetrate in the future. The predictions about have often been too long-term risk, which is harder to predict than violence risk over a short time frame. Now we know when you're on crystal meth, and we know that when you're drunk and on crystal meth, that potentially you get kind of goofy. So it makes you not very bright. So what do we have to do? Do we have to keep him away? Well, we do. If he's on parole, he's not allowed to drink. He's not allowed to have weapons. So here we've taken his 12-gauge shotgun loaded with slugs, and he's potentially how could he be violent if these are are what's going on? So as long as we keep him away from meth, and as long as we keep him away from alcohol, we're probably okay. Guess what's the first thing that is going to happen when he gets out of jail? He hasn't had any, well, hopefully he hasn't had any drugs or alcohol. So the first thing he's going to do is go to a bar. Well, that's typical. Well, anyway, as long as we can keep him away from 12-gauge shotguns, I think we're okay.
Right.
And from women. We can keep
With
him,
the option of putting him in a halfway house just to see how he would do?
that's usually what they do. They'll put him in a halfway house.
Okay, so not really exactly release him just yet, but just watch him.
Yeah, and if they smell alcohol in his breath, then they revoke his parole. Clinicians should have information about a range of historical, personal, and environmental violence-related variables. What if this guy has done this over and over and over again, and recidivism, of course, has been his modus operandi. He keeps being rearrested and thrown in jail. Then potentially, of course, you wouldn't allow him to have parole. Limit their predictions to specific kinds of violent behavior, and this is usually what you do. You never know. You never can predict what's going to happen next. Sometimes people threaten each other, but the violence is not there. They're not really violent people. They're just threatening people. They're bullies, potentially. Concentrate on appraising risks based on specific settings. So potentially what you want to do is keep him out of the bars. Keep him away from that portion of town where they use a lot of crystal meth, or where there is a lot of meth available to him. But that's what we need to do. We need to keep him away from crystal meth. We need to keep him away from alcohol. One of the most important advances in the area of risk assessment has involved the development and use of such specialized risk assessment tools. Evidence indicates that good actuarial and structured professional judgment approaches to risk assessment are comparably accurate in predictions of violence. Remember, I was telling you that I was a consultant with an individual that did sexual crimes risk assessment. This was his job. He had to decide whether to release people from prison. For some reason, he was working in Ohio. And for some reason, Ohio had just this whole mass of sexual crimes, individuals that were set to be released from prison, and there were too many of them for him to do risk assessment, so we got together and we did risk assessment together. It was really fascinating to look at all of these cases. I wanted to keep them all in prison. I wouldn't have released any of them. Well, there were a couple that I would have released. But he couldn't do that. The reason that they were up for parole is because Ohio had changed their laws. They had changed their rules to allow these individuals to get out of prison more readily. And of course, they'd be put on this was before the sex registration, but Ohio had one, and they actually used Ohio's method of putting people on a sex registry so that people could follow them. And that's Megan's law. That's put that law together. And it was written after the Ohio program, the paradigms that they had set up. Now, one of the interesting things about these individuals is that some of these people are psychopaths. And if they are, they're really good liars. Some of these people are alcoholics. But usually, if somebody's been in prison, they haven't been able to get a hold of alcohol. So they're not nearly as bad when they come out of prison as they are when they have been out of prison for an extended length of time and have gone back on the bottle. It was interesting. It was fascinating work, but I had to do risk assessment, and we had to determine who to release. Initially, it was like 10%. We said, well, 90% of these guys, I just leave them in prison. And the state of Ohio came back and said, no, if you want to you can only keep 10% in prison. You have to release 90%. So we had to decide which of those 90% we were going to release. And it was really kind of difficult. We tried to keep all the pedophiles in prison and release the rapists. As horrible as that, I know, what are we going to do? But that didn't work either. There were like 25% of them were pedophiles. So we had to release some of the pedophiles as well. Initially, the ones that were repeat offenders, of course, we had to keep in jail, but that didn't work either because about 15% of them were repeat offenders. So we had to go back, and we did this over and over and over again. We got to the point where we could repeat all of these cases, and there were like 135 of them. We could repeat them without even thinking about it because we had read everybody's files so much. We'd done all of these tests, or no, I hadn't done any of these tests. He had done all these tests on these individuals. He had interviewed all of these 135 guys, and we had to decide, and we had like a week to get all this stuff done. It was horrible. It was just a horrible situation. And in the end, of course, we released people we shouldn't have released. But we didn't have a choice because that was the law. Risk assessment, not a lot of fun. You have to predict whether somebody's going to do it again. That's the problem. The older they were, the more likely we were to release them. But that doesn't always work either. We see 40 and 50-year-olds that are rapists, that are serial rapists. So I mean that doesn't work either. It was just a horrible, horrible situation. Anyway, there we go. And that's the end of that chapter. Okay. Chapter 12 is about preparing for trial. Defendants in criminal trials ordinarily have a jury trial, but if the opposing party count consents, they can choose to have the verdict decided by a judge. And this is known as a bench trial. Sometimes you're better off with a jury, and sometimes you're better off with a judge. Some judges are kind of mean. They're known as hanging judges, so they never acquit. They always convict. But sometimes you're better off with a bench trial than you are with a jury trial. Some lawyers would rather face a female judge. Some lawyers would rather face a male judge. Sometimes it all depends on the case as to whether she is more likely to acquit or to convict. It really all depends on the case. Calvin and Ziesel in 1966 asked each district court judge in the United States to provide information about recent jury trials over which he or she had presided. This was in 1966. So the number of female judges was relatively small. Female judges have only come to the fore relatively recently. The first female Supreme Court justice was Sandra Day O'Connor, and that was under Reagan. Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was elected president in 1980, and he left office in 1988. So that was the first Supreme Court justice was in the 80s. Female Supreme Court justice. In criminal and civil trials, the judges reported that their verdict would have been the same as the jury's actual verdict in 75% of the cases. So 75% is a baseline that was set in 1966 by Calvin and Zeisel. In only 19.5% of the criminal cases did the jury return a guilty verdict where the judge would have ruled not guilty, or vice versa. Approximately 5% of the cases resulted in a hung jury. So only about 20% of the time did they disagree with the judge. In most of the discrepant decisions, the jury was more lenient than the judge. So juries tend to be a little bit friendlier to the defendant than the judge tends to be. The level of agreement between the jury and the judge was also high in civil trials. So whether it was a criminal trial or a civil trial, they both primarily agreed. About 75% of the time they agreed. What accounts for the discrepancies between judge and jury? Calvin and Zeisel attempted to answer these questions by delving more deeply into the judge's reactions to the cases and comparing them to the jury's verdicts. A few discrepancies apparently resulted from the facts that one party knew but the other did not. In some trials, the jury was swayed by apparent superiority of one lawyer. So that does factor in. Getting the best lawyer you possibly can find does factor in. About half of the disagreements involve jury sentiments, situations in which the judge's view, the jury verdict was determined by factors beyond the evidence and the law. Sometimes the jury is just a little bit softer hearted than judges are. This is one of the things that you notice not only in law, but you also notice it in medicine. Sometimes you come across a doctor or a nurse and they seem kind of callous. They seem kind of mean. They don't really care about your kids. What's wrong with these people? They're supposed to be helping people. Well, I'll tell you, after seeing 15 of those cases over the last 3 days, then probably they're just a little bit tired of that type of a problem. And they see it differently than you do because they see all these different cases. So they're adding them all up and they're figuring, well, if we did nothing, then probably the kid would be okay. Only in 1% of the cases is he going to have a negative reaction, yada, yada, yada. Of course, you've only seen one case, and it's your case, by golly, and so that's what you want to see. But the doctors and nurses, of course, they've been seeing this over and over and over again. Not only that, but potentially in the next room is a gunshot wound, and in the room beside that is a domestic violence case, and this is what they're dealing with. So not only are they dealing with your sick child, but they're also dealing with a gunshot wound, and they're also dealing with a domestic violence case, and potentially they've seen 5 gunshot wounds in the last 2 weeks, and it's really very traumatic for them. So they're going to react a lot differently. It's the same way with judges and juries. Well, it's the same way with judges. So the judge may be callous to all this stuff. He's seen it over and over and over again. And in 85% of the cases, this is the way it turns out. In 15% of the cases, it turns out badly. And that's just the way the world works. Police are the same way. Remember, they don't see good people. They never come in contact with people that aren't breaking the law. If they're driving down the road and you're driving 80 miles an hour and they stop you, by golly, they don't stop people for going the speed limit. They don't even talk to people that aren't breaking the law. They only talk to people that are breaking the law. And of course, every time they stop Travis, he's got an excuse. And it's always a good one. Wait a minute, my dog's sick and I got to take him to the vet. Wait a minute, you don't have a dog in the car. Well, I'm going home to pick up my dog. Yeah, that's it. So he's always got a good excuse, and it never works, does it? Ever? Sometimes it does. You can sometimes talk police out of giving you a ticket, but not always. Anyway, so jury sentiment is very important. Sometimes the juries are just a little bit softer-hearted. And of course, certain cases will raise different emotions. If it's a rape case, probably they're not going to be very friendly toward the defendant, despite the fact Well, what if, yeah, but what if the defendant is a really attractive guy? What if he's real pretty? What if he's, handsome?
Red flag, red flag.
Red flag, red flag. No, she said that he raped her. He said that it was consenting. So was it consenting or was it not? She said rape. She's screaming rape, and he's saying no. She seduced me. Not only did she want to have sex, but I didn't want to have sex, and she seduced me. And she says, that's not the way it happened. And he says, yes, it is. So who would the jury believe? The cute guy? Would he be better off with a male jury or a female jury?
Mixed.
If he's a cute guy.
I think it's still mixed, but I would just try to keep the eye on the ladies in the jury.
Women fall in love with men just by looking at them sometimes. I've never had that problem, but other guys have had that problem. I had to take my wife's glasses off before she thought I was cute.
Oh my God.
I know, it's so sad. Here, take your glasses off. I look a lot better from across the room. I'm going to see my wife on Wednesday. I'm going to call her up and tell her to take her glasses off. I told her I lost 10 pounds, so we'll see what she says. So I told her I lost 10 pounds, and guess what she said to me? I hate you, I'm not coming down to Florida, is what she said. She hates me because I lost 10 pounds. Well, I'm lonely, and that's why I'm not eating very well. So. Shouldn't she feel better about me losing 10 pounds?
Do you cook yourself?
Yeah, I cook my own crap. The same stuff over and over and over. But tonight I have to clean up the refrigerator. So I have to clean it out. So I'll have whatever leftovers are in there, that's what I'm having for supper. Jurors' sentiments play a role in decision-making when jurors believe that the crime is too trivial for the expected punishment. What are the laws in Florida? Florida. I'm sorry, I'm headed to Florida. What are the laws in Arizona? How about marijuana? What if somebody's got a baggie full of marijuana? A bag full of marijuana, trash bag full. Not a 5-gallon trash bag, but one of those tall kitchen bags full of marijuana. So you're on the jury, what are we going to do with this guy? It's against the law to have, that's a lot of marijuana. I don't know, it weighs out to be about 3 pounds. So what do we do? Is this, how serious a crime is this? In the last election, Michigan just legalized recreational marijuana. So now we have 8 states in the union that have it's legal to smoke marijuana. So what would you do if you were on the jury and this guy had a kitchen bag full of, I hope it wasn't one of those smelly ones, like the ones I have now stink. They got an odor to them. What would you do? Throw the book at him?
Yes.
You're going to throw the book at him, okay.
I'll probably look at it if it's distributing or medicinal or just recreational.
Well, he's got, he has headaches. He gets headaches. Usually it's after a really stressful week he gets headaches, so he needs that marijuana. Of course, he's got enough for...
But that's 3 pounds, it's
Enough
more,
for-
that's too much.
Yeah,
For
but
one
I mean,
person.
when you can get some, you get as much as you can, because you don't know when you can get some again.
But still, 3 pounds for
3
one
pounds, it's
person?
only going to last him
3 days.
6 months?
Well, Travis is throwing the book at him. What are you going to do?
I would look in those categories, distributing medicinal or recreational. If he shows like you say headaches, it would go right to medicinal. But then
Needs counseling and a license for that.
most people would most
He doesn't want to
physicians-
bother anybody.
Most physicians would use medicine instead of therapy. So it's
Yeah, but I mean, this is natural, isn't it? I mean, marijuana isn't natural. I mean, it's a plant, right? It's not like a bunch of chemicals thrown together to make.
Well, now it is.
I would be, I would,
It's a tough one.
yeah, it's a,
He's got 3 pounds of marijuana. What are
There's
you
no,
gonna do
there's
with
no
it?
prescription for it, so, there's nothing that ties it to where it's legal, so I would
You're gonna be nice to
cut
the
him off,
guy?
cut him off and just say no.
Is this a trivial crime? In 8 states of the union, you can have all the marijuana you want, right?
Not Arizona.
Yeah.
He's got 3 pounds. He's got 3
3 pounds,
pounds.
that's intention for distribution.
Distribution,
because-
so
yeah.
you're gonna throw the book at him too,
Yeah,
so go over on
because 3 pounds
Travis's
is too
side
much
of
for
that.
one person, like
of the
that thing's
court.
gonna dry up before he can even enjoy it. He's gonna share.
He's gonna
I
share?
think he's gonna share.
He's gonna share. So are you gonna throw the book at him or you
Yeah,
gonna let
Not
him go?
even charged him, it's just
It's for a party.
that he's gonna distribute.
His birthday's
Maybe he's.
He's got headaches. Don't you feel sorry for him? You got a headache. You got a headache too? He's giving you a headache?
Yeah.
Okay. So you're gonna throw the book at him, you're gonna let him go? Throw the book at him or let him go? You're gonna smoke it with him? I don't think that's an option at this point.
Wait, where's he going after this?
You're gonna take down his address and go to his house. Let him go. Okay.
Oh,
What are you gonna do, Arlen? Let him throw the book at him or let him go? Big crap. Throw the
We're
book?
all going to Tyrone's house.
Throw the book at him? You're gonna throw the, he's got 3 pounds of marijuana. He says he's got headaches and that's why he needs it. Because he works in a high stress environment. He works in a warehouse, okay? Okay, and he's got big appetite for beer over beer. And sometimes people yell at him because he's slow. Oh, he's so slow. You're gonna let him go or you're gonna throw the book at him? Throw the book? Execute. Let him go, okay.
First in history.
Yeah, execute. Executed for having marijuana. No, it's happened before. Jurors believe that the defendant has already been sufficiently sanctioned. This happens as well. Jurors believe that a law is unfair. Well, here's the marijuana law. I mean, if it's legal in 8 states in the union, and well, it's legal up in Colorado. You can just wander up into Cortez and smoke all the pot you want. I mean, if he had that bag in Cortez, which is where he probably got the 3 pounds of marijuana anyway, if he had it up there, he'd be okay, right?
Maybe.
So, they, some jurors, like Sharon, thinks that it's unfair that he should be, and of course Tyrone is going to bake cookies with the guy. I'm sorry, brownies, excuse me. Jurors see a crime as minor or victimless. Is this this? He says that he's going to smoke that marijuana all by himself, and he needs it for his headaches. So is this a victimless crime? Who's being hurt here? Really?
Well, who is he living with?
Well,
And then there's potential, he lives there, he works in the warehouse too, which is a really highly hazardous environment to work in, you know, and if he's gonna go to work high, or does he do it before
he
work?
goes
And how do we know that he doesn't?
so damn slow. I'm surprised they haven't fired him yet.
Yeah,
at this
see,
point.
so, he's a hazard, he's a risk factor. No one wants to be paying all that workers' comp if anything happens to him for him being a dumbass at work.
Then he could buy more pot.
Yeah, see, it makes the situation worse.
A critique of Calvin and Zeisel study, judges were permitted to choose which trial or trials they reported. Only 500 out of 3,500 judges provided responses, so they didn't get responses from everybody. Juries have changed in many ways since this study was conducted. Remember, this was in 1966. In states, especially in the South, there were no black jurors, ever, in 1966. Civil rights laws were signed in 64 and 65. Where do you get your jury? You got your jury from a list of voters. Since black people weren't allowed to vote in the South, and this continued up into the 70s, the probability of having a black person on your jury was fairly remote if you lived in Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Florida, Arkansas. The probability of having a black person on your jury was fairly remote. Texas, I'm sorry, forgot about Texas. So there is increased diversity. So who's going to be on a jury? Has anybody in here ever been on a jury? You all vote, don't you? Have you ever been called to jury duty?
Yeah.
You've been called to jury duty. Nobody else? Interesting.
Right?
So who's on a jury? Usually it's retired people. It's old people. They're the only ones that don't have a job that they have to go to every day. So it's usually old people. We have only the judge's attribution of what the jurors' feelings and sentiments were, and this is when we're talking about Calvin and Zeisel in 1966. Okay, so let's do it again. Let's replicate Calvin and Zeisel. Updated criminal case comparisons. Eisenberg et al. In 2005 collected data from jurors, judges, and attorneys in more than 350 trials. The rate of jury-judge agreement was 70%. Remember, with Calvin and Zeisel, it was 75%. So this is really pretty close if you think about it. 70% and 75%. Circumstances in which jurors were more likely than judges to return not guilty verdicts. Jurors were more impressed than judges by the presence of a third-party defense witness, someone other than the defendant who supported the individual. Jurors were impressed by the absence of a prior criminal record. And of course, judges don't look at that. They are less likely to look at that as to whether they're guilty or not guilty. There's always a first time for everything, for a crime. My son says that if a man hits a woman once, he will do it twice. So he says this is my son who used to work in a bar. So he says that if a man hits a woman, then the only way to stop him from hitting her again is for somebody else to punch him. Somebody else to hit him, and that will stop it. Because then he will know, especially if it is the brother of the woman that got punched the first time, then the probability of it happening again is fairly remote. That's my son's theory. That's why he wants to go and beat up my daughter's baby daddy. I know. So we have to keep him apart, because he'll cold cock the guy. Yeah. I don't want to see him arrested. He's a teacher. You know, that'd be sad. Well, this guy punches people out for a living. That's not a good idea. Claremont and Eisenberg in 1992 examined plaintiff win rates in federal cases tried before either juries or judges from 1979 to 1989. Differences emerged in products liability and medical malpractice cases only. So if somebody cheated somebody, my wife just bought a new car about 4 months ago because she's got bad hips. So she was crawling up into her car and was messing her hips up. So now that she's had both of her hips replaced, she got a new car. The car that she bought when did she buy that car? Just before the summer, just before I got home for the summer. She bought it in May. The car that she bought in May, the electrical system went out in it. You know, she's had it for 6 months, and the electrical system went out. The trunk wouldn't open. Part of the display on the dashboard wouldn't work. It was a Honda Accord. Product liability. So there was a problem with the car. And of course, she took it to the Honda dealer. They said, well, we can fix it. They worked on the trunk all day and they couldn't get it open. I don't know. So she traded it in, and got a new car.
Would that
Crazy.
also fall under that limit law?
Limit law lasts for the first 30 days usually. It all depends on the
30,
state.
60?
Well, that's-
Depending on the state.
It's a state, yeah.
And
And
mileage.
this was Iowa, it's 30 days. She hated the car from the very beginning. She hated the car. There was too much stuff on it. It had one of those things that it told you when you were changing lanes. The steering wheel would vibrate when you change lanes. And this was automatic. I mean, it just drove me nuts because, you know, I drive in and out of traffic all the time. And it was shaking, it's like giving me electrical shock every once in a while. Sometimes it wouldn't let me turn the steering wheel.
Huh.
Yeah. So I thought it was just too dangerous. I didn't like the car. She didn't like it because it was blue. She's a red car person, and now she has a red car. So now she's happy. But product liability. The other is medical malpractice. Did anybody watch 60 Minutes last night? They were talking about naloxone. Naloxone is the drug that you give to people who have overdosed on opioids or opiates. And it saves their life. If they've overdosed, they're not breathing anymore, you've got about 3 minutes to give them a shot of naloxone. The naloxone will block, the problem with opioids is it puts the portion of your brain to sleep that makes you breathe and your heart to beat. So if that happens to you, if you give somebody a shot of naloxone, it brings them back almost instantaneously. It takes about 5 seconds, and the person is shot back into life. It's really kind of exciting. So how much does it cost for a shot of naloxone? Well, it costs about 50 cents for a shot of naloxone. That's not so bad. But of course, most people don't carry around a vial of naloxone with a syringe that they can shoot into somebody. So they have other means of getting this stuff into your system. One is a spray that goes up your nose. Costs $60 a shot. Well, I can give you a shot for 50 cents, but I have to have a syringe and I have to have that vial of naloxone with me, right? They've got a new form that is it's like an EpiPen that you just put it on the thigh and punch the button and it shoots the naloxone into your thigh. Brings you back to life almost right away. $4,000. Okay, so we're talking about medical malpractice here. That's usually a doctor that screws up, but it can also be a pharmaceutical company. Is $4,000 too much to pay for a 50-cent dose of naloxone? Let's vote. How many people think that that's too much? Just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Is that everybody? You don't think it's too much? $4,000?
I've got a lot more questions first before I decide.
Okay. $4,000 for a 50-cent shot of naloxone? What do you think? They started giving naloxone to all first responders. Now they give it to people out on the streets, just to save people's lives. They give it to drug addicts, not for them, but for the person that they're shooting up with, if they happen to overdose. So what are your questions?
Those are some of the factors that I was going to ask, because that's what I was wondering. And then, of course, just
Naloxone,
everything that goes into making that EpiPen to make it that much more accessible. And then, of course, what
it talks
company
you
makes
through
it.
injecting the EpiPen.
Yeah, see,
Yeah.
so it's kind of.
$4,000 worth of information there? For a non-medical person, I
Yeah,
guess.
for a non-medical person.
Yeah, but
yeah.
$4,000.
But come on, I mean, if you don't need it, then if you really want it, then you guess you can pay for it. It's fine to be.
That's exactly what they said. They said, we didn't make this for the junkie out on the street. We made this for
The people that really do.
the rich lady that is taking painkillers for her back.
See,
That's
she's
who
got
we're-
the money to do it, so.
And, well, it's not that she has the money, it's that the insurance company will pay
Pay
for
for
her
it.
to
Yeah.
have that.
And come on, FDA and all them, they have to stay in business too. They're
Well,
a
it's-
whole corporation.
It's not the FDA, it's that drug company. And they made a profit off of that $4,000 EpiPen.
Yeah. So they could probably, and who knows, it's probably going into another research of something else that they're creating.
That's exactly what they said.
I don't know, see, so
I
that's
know.
those questions, there's reasons.
So the question is,
why.
are they telling us the truth or are they lying to us?
They don't have
They
to.
told us, they said on 60 Minutes last night, we will give this pen away.
Mhm.
If your insurance company won't give it to you, we will give it to you.
Mhm.
And she asked, well, you're losing your profits. Well, their profits are, they don't start losing profits until they've given what? 8,000 of them away.
So it doesn't mean nothing for them
Yeah,
to give
it doesn't
them
mean
away.
anything. And of course, the insurance companies are still gonna pay for it. Okay, so what are we talking about? We're talking about the differences emerged in products liability and medical malpractice cases. Only plaintiffs had more success with judges, 48% of the win rate, than with juries, 28% of the win rate. So juries get pretty pissed off when stuff doesn't work, or when somebody kills somebody, or a pharmaceutical company is ripping people off. Remember that one guy bought a chemical company, pharmaceutical company, and there was a drug for AIDS, people suffering from AIDS, and it cost $120 a dose, and he raised the price of that medication to $3,600. From $120 to $3,600, and now nobody could pay for it. Now, the problem with AIDS is, of course, it's a pre-existing condition. So a lot of the insurance companies still don't pay for your AIDS drugs. So it's coming out of pocket. So $120 a dose is not too bad. I mean, you know, I got $120 on me right now, I think. But I don't have $3,600, okay? I've got money. I got $15. Look at that, I got $15.
Yay! You're another person today.
I know. Wait, somebody's gonna come to my office, nobody here, of course, you guys don't try to borrow money from me. But it's like, every time I go to the ATM, all of a sudden, people call me on the telephone. You know,
man.
I know, they must be watching from the bushes. What's this all about?
They have a camera installed.
And not one of them, but like three, I'll have three people ask me for money the same day. It
Probably
just,
all from the same family too.
they are, how did you know?
I've been dabbling long enough to
Ah, there
understand
you
these
go.
things.
Okay. Researchers attributed the differences in civil cases to select effects. The selection effects, the selection of cases tried by juries differed from those tried by judges. Defense lawyers tended to settle cases in which the plaintiff had a strong case, typically leaving juries to decide relatively weaker cases for the plaintiff. Thus, they appear to make different decisions than judges do. So remember, there is no equality here. The only cases they're going to see are the ones that are questionable. The stronger the case, the less likely it will ever go to court. They will probably be plea bargain, either in one way or the other. Or if you've got a rich corporation. Rich corporations can keep judgments going for decades, as I told you with the AT&T case. AT&T, Bell Telephone used to be the richest corporation in the United States. Then GM became very powerful and very rich, so the car companies, Ford Motor Company, remember Ford Motor Company made a car that if you ran into the back end of it, it exploded and burst into flame, cooking the person inside. And this happened over and over and over and over, and they did nothing about it. They could have fixed it. They could have replaced a plastic part with a metal part, and that would have kept that car from exploding. But instead of doing that, well, it was. They were saving like 35 cents on the car. They made, what, 3 or 4 million of these things? That's a huge profit. It was cheaper for them to pay off the person that died in the car than it was to change that part. That pisses people off. We expect the companies that we buy from to give us the best product they possibly can. And if there's a problem with it, we expect them to fix it. For free,
Of course.
as long as it's still under warranty, which is what my wife's car was still under warranty, and they would have fixed everything for free, but she had already had the car stop on her in the middle of the road.
What the hell?
I know.
Oh my God.
How dangerous is that?
So mad.
My poor wife with her 2 plastic hips. Walking along the street, she could barely walk.
Wait,
It is-
you're all the way over here.
I'm all the way in
joining us.
Arizona. Obviously, it's my fault.
Giving money away.
Buying $1,000 worth.
Only that one family, though. I only give. I get a free turkey.
Out here supporting another family.
I get a free turkey. Guess what I'm going to do with my turkey?
Give it that.
That family's going to get my turkey. I can't take it on the plane. I don't think I'll take it. I'll just get it.
Poor Bruce.
Same family. Another question is whether jury awards for punitive damages are different from awards assessed by judges, and whether the two groups differ on the reasons of those awards. So we're giving them away money now. We're trying to decide how much money people are going to get. Now, personally, I don't know, have you seen these mesothelioma advertisements? Yeah, so they're on television all the time. You can become part of the decision. The tobacco companies have been sued ad nauseum, and they have to pay $285 billion. So they have these ads telling you, we raped you people, everybody in the United States that's ever smoked a cigarette. We raped you people. We've been doing it for decades because we were trying to make a profit. We were increasing the amount of nicotine. We knew what we were doing. We ripped you guys off, and we made you addicted to tobacco. So now we have to pay $285 billion, and part of that is for us to have to admit that we did this over for decades. But all those people became billionaires. All those tobacco company executives became billionaires, and it was worth every penny because I don't care if you're dead. At least I make money, and I got to go to Hawaii every.
Like that
third-
movie, Thank You for Smoking. Have you seen that one?
That's a
Yeah.
funny movie. It's a true story.
It's true.
It's true. All that stuff is true. So when they decide how much money they're going to give somebody, this is really kind of interesting. So are judges better than juries, or are juries better than judges? Eisenberg et al. In 2002 found that judges and juries did not suffer substantially. They awarded punitive damage of about the same size, although the range of the jury awards was somewhat greater than that of the judicial awards. I just watched a movie called Mystery Alaska. Fascinating movie. This guy shoots this guy, and because the guy that shoots the other individual is from the town, they try to award him damages for shooting the guy. It was really kind of funny. Of course, it's a criminal case, and you don't award damages in criminal cases, but they tried to give him, I don't know, $20,000 or something for shooting the other guy, which was kind of funny. Anyway, that's not going to happen. These results call into question the notion that juries are unable to set reasonable limits on punitive damages, and that's probably pretty close to being true. Jury selection begins as officials assemble a panel or a venire of prospective jurors. It's a venire. Jury selection must neither systematically eliminate nor underrepresent any subgroups of the population. So theoretically, it shouldn't be all white people like in this picture. Theoretically, it should be a very diverse group of individuals. If you have 5% of the population in your town is Asian, then they have a 5% possibility of being on the jury. If you're 35% black, it should be about 35% black. But of course, we have lawyers that are going to decide who to put on the jury, and they may want to select African Americans for their jury, or they may want to select only white people in their jury. Now this is really kind of dangerous at this point, because if a lawyer is constantly picking an all-white jury, their judges are gonna let them do that, because that is not representative of the population that they're dealing with. To encourage representativeness, U.S. Supreme Court cases since 1880 have forbidden systematic or intentional exclusion of religious, racial, and other cognizable groups from jury panels. Once upon a time, everybody on the Supreme Court was not only white, but they were also male, and they were also Protestant. Everybody was. No Catholics, no Jews. Yet, a relatively large portion of our population are Jewish, and a relatively large portion are Catholic. Now, the interesting thing about so everybody was Protestant. So the Supreme Court was always Protestant. Everybody on the Supreme Court was Protestant. Maybe they were Baptist, maybe they were Methodist, maybe they were Episcopalian, but they were Protestant. So if we look at the Supreme Court now, what do we see? Are they Protestant? They're almost all Catholic. There are only two religions that are represented on the Supreme Court. Catholicism, what's the other? Mormon. Only in Arizona and Utah, right? So what's the other religion? We've got Catholic. What's the other religion? Sorry?
Christianity.
You mean Protestant? No, no Protestants. Not a single Protestant. Once upon a time, nobody but Protestants. Now all of a sudden, we've got no Protestants on the Supreme Court. Not a single one. So what's the other religion that's represented? Catholic and...
Judaism?
Exactly. And Judaism. Well, almost all of them are Catholic. There's 9, and I think 6 are Catholic and 3 are Jewish. As interesting as that is. And I think Kavanaugh's Catholic. I'm pretty sure Kavanaugh's Catholic. He went to Catholic high school. Of course he did. And that's where he did or did not do what he said he
We
didn't
all
do.
know what they're going through with that.
But historically, most veneers have middle-aged, well-educated white men overrepresented. And of course, this is a problem. 70% of the people in the United States are white. But most white people are female. Well, about 51% are female. So where in the world do all these white guys come from? The U.S. Supreme Court and Congress established the requirement that the pool from which the jury is selected must be a representative cross-section of the community. There are 2 reasons for this. This would result in juries that are more heterogeneous, and there are advantages to having a heterogeneous jury, one that has minorities as well as the dominant population. Minority members might discourage majority members from expressing prejudice. If you've got all old white guys on the jury, it's possible that they will have some degree of prejudice against African Americans, against American Indians, against Hispanics. Right now, the immigration seems to be a huge topic, at least with the President of the United States, who was talking about it nonstop before the election. He hasn't said a word about it since the end of the election. That caravan those invaders that were coming to the United States, where are they now? These invaders, where are they? He's going to send 15,000 active duty military troops to the border, and they're going to stand there with their
Chain link
weapons.
arms.
They're going to stop these guys from
Make
coming
a
across the
human
border.
wall.
What happened to that caravan? Where are they now? The ones that didn't disappear are now at the border, trying to get in. But there's only, they started out with like 7,000 or 8,000 people, and it's only at like 700 or 800 now. So, but we still have those troops on the border, which is kind of interesting to me.
Vacation.
I don't know. hate to spend Thanksgiving with, my buddies rather than my family, but that's okay. Let them do what they're going to do. Minority members are more, so they're less likely to express prejudice. Heterogeneous juries would be better fact finders. They could examine facts from different points of view. Jury representativeness would give the appearance of legitimacy. Juries should reflect the standards of the community. When certain components of the community are systematically excluded from jury service, the community is likely to reject both the legal process and its outcomes as invalid. And maybe that's what's happening here, that maybe that's what's happening in communities where they have a large black population. If there aren't black people on the juries that are trying to convict these cops for shooting black people, then how legitimate is that jury? If it's only got white people on it. And this is what was happening before Jim Crow, during Jim Crow. Not before Jim Crow, but during Jim Crow. Until the Civil Rights Acts were passed. But it didn't stop there. I mean, the Civil Rights Act was signed in 1964 and 1965. The Voter Rights Act was passed in 1965. But it wasn't until the 70s that any of this took place, that they tried to do anything. They tried to integrate the schools in the South, but that didn't happen until the 1970s. They fought it in court. The white Southerners fought it in court. And this was a tough fight. They didn't want to be educated. They didn't want their children to be educated with black people. They thought black people were not as bright. They thought that they would, I don't know. I have no idea what their rationale was. But they had it, and it's lasted for an extended length of time. And unfortunately, of course, if that is what's happening in a court of law, then they don't see the court as legitimate. How do courts go about forming the veneer in order to make the jury representative? For many years, voter registration lists were used as a primary source for jury pool selection, but such lists underrepresent segments of the community. Only people that vote could possibly be on a jury. Now, of course, we don't use those anymore. Now we use licensed drivers as to get our jury pool from, which makes a lot more sense. A lot more people drive than vote. In some elections, we only have like 35% of the population votes. In the last election, it was one of the heaviest elections we've ever had, well, in modern history. So we had a lot of people that came out of the woodwork to vote, which of course, some people are claiming they shouldn't have voted because they... Well, why don't we stop right here? We'll pick this up next time, and I'll complain about more stuff.